The St. Charles County Veterans Museum is a 501c3 nonprofit business. The museum would not exist without the donations of our generous community. Your donations ensure the museum continues to share and preserve the stories of our veterans. Would you like to be part of something special? To donate, visit sccvetsmuseum.org and click on Donate. The Dog Tag Podcast may at times cover sensitive topics including, but not limited to, suicide, abuse, violence, severe mental illness, sex, drugs, and alcohol addiction. You are advised to refrain from watching or listening to the Dog Tag Podcast if you are likely to be offended or adversely impacted by any of these topics. Neither the company, host, director, or guests shall at any time be liable for the content covered, causing offense, distress, or other reaction. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only. The primary purpose of the Dog Tag Podcast is to educate. The views, information, or opinions expressed on the Dog Tag Podcast are solely the views of the individuals or guests involved and by no means represent absolute facts. The Dog Tag does not accept responsibility for their views or comments. This podcast is sponsored by the Renee Seray Allstate Agency, located here in O'Fallon, Missouri. She is licensed in Missouri and Illinois and focuses on your personal and commercial insurance needs. Her office is located at 2764 Highway K, O'Fallon, Missouri 63368. She can be reached at 636-379-9556 or by email at reneeessary@allstate.com, reneeessary@allstate.com. If you are shopping for insurance and want an active agent that will educate and advise you on the coverage you need, reach out to her. Welcome to the Dog Tag Podcast from the St. Charles County Veterans Museum with your host, Jason Galvin and Jim Higgins. Today in studio, we have Chris Lenington, United States Army. Jim, go ahead and kick us off.
Well, welcome, Chris. We're glad to have you here tonight. And, you end up serving a lot of years in the Army, and obviously we've been volunteer Army for many, many years, and the first question I like to ask people is, why did you choose to enter the service?
It's a pretty simple question. There was no college fund for me. So it was either enter the Army or do something that probably wouldn't have turned out so good for me.
Okay. And you would serve 20 years. You were deployed to Kosovo, 1 tour in Iraq, and 3 tours in Afghanistan in one of the outposts there. Mm-hmm. And I'm always intrigued when I hear people tell me about the outposts because now obviously I'm an outsider looking in, but from what you see in the videos, the way they're portrayed, that's pretty hazardous duty.
It is. I think that the videos, most of the movies portray it pretty good for the most part. It's austere environment for sure. For us, for me, I spent 7 months on an outpost in the Kunar Valley area, and it was MREs a couple times a day, no showers for 7 months. We washed ourselves out of an ammo can. It was fun. It was a good time, so.
And the other part of that always makes me wonder a little bit, the world's greatest Army, the best equipped Army, and 7 months without a shower, washing out of a helmet or an ammo can. That just kind of, I have a tough time grasping that. But so life was pretty tough for you guys at the outpost.
Yep.
So you spent 7 months there. Tell us a little bit about, how that played out over the 20 years. Were you young when you went over to those? When did this come along in your career?
The outpost, I was in my early to mid-20s. Nope, I was late 20s when I went to that deployment. So I was still fairly immature when it came to as an adult, but at that point I already served in Kosovo and Iraq. So leading soldiers, young soldiers, into a place like that. And I think I said this before, but we actually thought that me and another squad leader thought that we weren't going to make it out of that place. And quick story is we were in the National Training Center in California probably about 7 months before we deployed there. And that's when a place called the Ranch House, they got attacked, and about half of them got killed in action. And we were going to the same place. So at that point, we think we got all brand new soldiers, and it's just you and me looking at the other squad leader like, we may not make it out of this place. But, we kept our head on as best as we could, and kept pushing through, and, trained them as best as we possibly could, and ended up not losing any soldiers during that. We had a lot of injuries, but we didn't lose any on the outpost.
So how is that? You were a staff sergeant? Did you get?
Yep.
Attained that rank, and your leaders, the sergeant, the non-coms are the real leaders in a unit, and you had very many young, inexperienced guys in your command?
So the way that it got set up was we stood that unit up from the groundwork. So it was 1st Infantry Division, 1st the 126th Infantry, and it got decommissioned after it was in Germany. That unit was in Germany. They went to Iraq. It was a disastrous deployment for them in Iraq. Disastrous. While they were redeploying, they stood up the same brigade in Fort Hood, Texas, because they wanted to bring the 1st Infantry Division back home from Germany. So they stood up that brigade at Fort Hood, and they brought all brand new soldiers into this unit from basic training, from AIT. So they were all brand new, and some of the leaders were still, the young leaders were still brand new. We had some sergeants, team leaders, and some squad leaders that were transitioned from other MOSs, and they weren't combat veterans at the time. They knew how to lead soldiers, but they didn't have the experience that only a few of us did. And it turned out to be a very good deployment for the most part. We lost some soldiers, but it wasn't as bad as we thought.
We hear a lot of the people that we meet with tell us that you just go over there and do your job, stay focused. You kind of do the practice on the state side, go over there, hit the ground running, and do your job. How do you keep that focus while you're in a forward base like that? And in the day-to-day monotony and staying focused, when you're real world getting shot at and you have to stay alert and all that stuff, does the training really just kick in and you do your job, or is there any kind of reservations at all?
I think the biggest thing is you don't want to get shot. I think that's the motivation. And I mean, training does kick in. So having repetition in the States, and that does kick in. But I think the motivation is really you're looking out for each other, and you don't want to get shot. I mean, you don't want to get blown up. And it is monotonous to a point, but it's something different every single day because they're throwing something at you every single day that's absolutely ridiculous. It could be pop shots from the mountains. It could be a rocket from the mountains. It could be who knows what it is. We're doing 2 patrols per day. And it's changing up every single day. So, the biggest things, the motivation for me was I don't want to get killed, nor do I want to allow any of my soldiers to get killed. I want them all to go back home. And that was really the motivation behind it.
Chris, my understanding of some of these outposts is you're in a position, usually down in a valley, very disadvantaged by the terrain. Is that how it was at the base you were at?
Yeah, and most of them are like that. They're put in the valley for a reason, usually to watch a road or construction of something, a school, supplies going back and forth between outposts. They put ours to observe a road that was getting built into the Korengal Valley to watch those construction workers. Unfortunately, it was a terrible place to get put. We were literally at the base of 2 huge mountain ranges. And there was a river that ran in between the mountains. So yeah, it could have been really disastrous. After we spent 7 months there, and we decommissioned the base and pulled out.
Do you remember having that oh crap moment when you first got to the base, when you started to take a look around?
Yeah, it's funny. Funny you say that. So I was one of the first leaders into Afghanistan for my unit. So I was advanced going in, and when I hit Afghanistan, at that point I've already been deployed twice. But when I hit Afghanistan, it was a whole new suck level, just because we knew we were going into the belly of the beast at that point. Not any hotter than Iraq, definitely, but it was a whole different warfare, and I was one of the first leaders to touch ground at the outpost, relieving the 173rd Airborne. And when I got off the Chinook helicopter we had one HLZ, so one helicopter landing zone that we can land a helicopter, and I looked at these gentlemen. They looked like they spent almost a year at this one outpost, and they were so ready to go home. They were beat to crap, and their clothes were tattered. And I thought, I have a year of this, and it hit me at that point like, oh man, this is going to be rough. Living in HESCO basket buildings, and there was other than some wood structures that some engineers built, there was nothing, absolutely nothing. So it was a little bit crazy, and then leaving that place was also crazy, but that's a totally different story.
So you get off the Chinook to make entry and relief. What's the turnaround time for relief from those guys leaving to you guys getting there? Is it debrief time? Is there any kind of time like that? And also, how do you get resupplied?
So turnaround time was I got off the aircraft and they got on the aircraft. So the squad that I was replacing literally got on and said goodbye and peaced out. There was a little bit of transition from their platoon sergeant. We did some patrols with them, but that was it. What was the second part of the question?
And how do you get resupplied in a forward operating base where you got tattered clothing, but how are you doing? Looking for food? Is food, you said MREs, but I mean, how often do you get more?
So they would fly in, resupply as we needed it per helicopter. That was the only way to get in per American vehicle. We did have an American convoy try to come in on the road one time, and they hit an ID, and then they stopped driving on the road. So the only means of communication or transportation was either by helicopter or taking a raft down the river. But that wasn't a good idea. So the only way to get there was by Black Hawk. Chinook is it's hard. It was hard to land a Chinook on that HLZ because it was very small. So usually it was by Black Hawk. And you're only flying 6 to 9 personnel at that time. But they would fly out ammo and MREs. Daily, we had an Afghan man that would drive his vehicle up the road and bring us hot chow from the base outside the valley. They had cooks down there, and they would make some food, and that Afghan driver would get paid $10, and it's big money over there, and he would drive that vehicle up the road and drop off food. The guy was a wonderful guy, but at first we thought, well, we're going to get poisoned. That's the first thing that's going to happen. Quick story about that. In the middle of our deployment, the guy pulled up to bring our dinner chow to us, the hot meal that we had, and he got out of the vehicle and he was bloody. He got shot about halfway through. They shot the vehicle up. We pulled him in and we lifted him off, and he got medical care, but the guy still brought our hot chow. So, yeah, it was pretty good.
So I'm thinking, you're in this deplorable situation there. You're a staff sergeant, you're a leader, and you pretty much got green troops with you. I mean, that's a tough situation as a leader, and there's no escaping it. You can't say, I'm going to go into town this week and kind of blow off some steam. So that sounds like a whole lot of added stress on you.
It is. As a leader, you've really got to learn to adapt quickly, especially in a place like that. You got to really keep soldiers motivated and continuously try to find new ways to keep their minds off of what's going around them. When you get woke up in the middle of the night by gunfire and you got to quickly put on your kit, it's tough. And I think just understanding each one of your soldiers' mental capacity and where they are at that point, it's just having one-on-one conversations with these kids, and understanding like what their trigger points are, what their needs are, and try and meet them as best as possible in an austere, environment. There was a lot of conflict in between each other, just like if you're living in the same house with your wife for 7 months and you don't leave, there's going to be an argument. It's the same thing. So it's just a matter of keeping them engaged. And at the time we had computers, so we were able to play some video games and movies and stuff like that. Power was a problem. We only had 2 generators. And when one went down, that was a problem, so.
What did you find was the most difficult part of the patrol part? I mean, was it the actual going on patrol? Was it the rotation? Would everybody go on patrol, or would some people stay back? I mean, how did that work? Give us some details around that if you can.
So I'll start off with when we first deployed, we came out there with 3 squads. Let me back up. No, 4 squads. We came out there with 3 light squads and then 1 heavy weapon squad. We lost a squad leader right at the beginning of the deployment. It wasn't due to enemy fire or anything. So then we merged into 2 squads and 1 weapon squad. About 1 month into deployment, my weapon squad leader, we lived in the same hut. It was just a wooden hut. We started getting hit in the morning by PKM and AK-47 fire. He got out of his cot, tried to put his kit on, and he got shot through his arm while in the same room. Lost the feeling in his arm, everything. We had to lift him out. So at that point, we were down to only 2 squads, me and a guy named Staff Sergeant Kirk. So the rotation was I would go out and then he would go out at random times. The biggest thing on patrols at that area was it's the unknown, right? You don't know when you're going to get hit, first of all. But in that area, they never hit us outside the wire because they knew that we would bring the heat upon them. And that was the biggest thing because in that area, what we got mostly was they were transporting their goods, their ammo between locations of where they're at. So we were getting a lot of that traffic in that area. So it wasn't a lot of heavy Taliban movement. Up in the mountains there were, but they would cross. We wouldn't be able to see them. But if most of them that were around that area knew if we went out, we had helicopter support. We had Apache support. We had Kiowa support. We had A-10s. We had a lot of things that to our disposal because they knew in that area. So anytime that we would enter the wire, that's when they hit us because we were at the weakest. So when we leave the wire, we're very kitted up. We're ready to go, right? And we have support. Well, as soon as we enter that wire, that's the weakest point at that time because now we're refitting. We're tired. We just walked, 12 hours. The squad that's on guard, because there'd be a squad on guard on the base and then a squad off the base doing the patrol. Both would be tired because one would be up for a long time doing guard, the other would be off patrol. And that's when they would hit us with rockets and PKM fire. So anytime we'd enter the base, we'd have to be ready for that attack. And it was a weird, environment.
So that was Afghanistan, and I kind of think you said something to the effect it was very different than being in Iraq. Can you kind of talk about the differences between the 2 deployments?
Weather. Iraq was extremely hot. when I entered Iraq, it was kind of the beginning of Iraq. So we got, we were the invading force, but we got pushed back a little bit of time. Our time got pushed back because our boats and our vehicles couldn't enter through Turkey, and then they had to turn around and go through Kuwait. So we kind of had a delayed entry into Iraq. But Iraq was, again, at the beginning of the war, so it was a little bit of the wild, wild west. There wasn't many rules. It was get the job done. We worked alongside our company, did a lot of things with spies in the area, DIA agents that were placed there before the war, and we ran our own missions. The company commander called the shots, and we did a lot of things. Afghanistan was a little bit different. You're fighting a war in the mountains. You're going up the mountains. You're going down the mountains. The enemy is different. You're not fighting house to house. You're not driving far distance. A lot of times you're in a stagnant location in Afghanistan. You're guarding a base. You're flying out to because the landmass is bigger. So you have to get out there by helicopter to get to any location, and then you're walking, and then you get picked up by helicopter most of the time. So the fight's different because the people are different. In Iraq, the enemy or the people are driven by money and greed. Afghanistan, they just didn't want us to be there. They want us to leave them alone. They wanted to farm their land and be over with it. And most people didn't care that Al-Qaeda was there or any terrorist organization. They didn't care. They're so far behind in the world that nothing matters to them. They don't care who's the president. They don't care who's in their, whatever's going on in the government. They don't care. But Iraqis, they're a little bit different. There is a little bit of care there, but their motivation's different. So that's a little bit how it differs in that fight.
What year was that you were in Iraq?
2004 is when I entered Iraq.
If you had any relationship building exercises with the people in the countries there, what did that look like?
Afghanistan, we ran a lot of what's called medcap, so we would do a lot of medical things with the community. They didn't get a lot of medicine out there, so we'd fly in or walk in or drive in, and we would do a whole medical, evaluation on the population. And they really liked that because they didn't get any medicine. Stomach problems are a huge thing when you have no soap and water. All those bugs and everything, and they're living in their stomach, and they always have stomach problems. So that was a huge thing. In Iraq, similar, but they were, like I said, they were driven by money. We would help build things. We would literally give people money to get information. So that kind of differs, with that.
You spent, and I guess I'm talking about both countries, but we often hear a lot of people saying, why were we over there? And of course, the way we exited the country. But very often we hear some of the soldiers come back saying they did help in many, many ways. It was very small victories maybe, but could you see where you help the people from time to time?
This subject is a little bit weird because if we think in history, World War II, World War I, Vietnam, the Korean War, we're fighting a population, right? We're fighting a country. We know the enemy. We know the friendly elements, and we're fighting for the right to live, right? And that's for the whole world. And I don't know what year this changed, warfare, but at some point warfare changed, and we no longer are going to fight a country. It's not going to happen. Russia, China, I don't see that ever being a thing. So an ideology has taken over warfare now, right? And it's only going to get worse. So when it comes to soldiers saying, well, why was I over there? Did we do it for a good cause? We entered Iraq, we fought Iraq, but that really wasn't a war, right? I mean, we lost people during the first Iraq war, obviously. But it was a quick war. It wasn't a long, drawn out thing. And then when we entered Iraq, again, it's I think it was the start of an idea. The guerrilla warfare. We were chasing people that weren't there. And then Afghanistan's even worse, right? We're chasing an idea that these people have, a religion. So, do I think we made a difference? Yeah, we made a difference, obviously, in some people's lives. There were some great Afghan soldiers, people. Same thing with Iraq, and we were there. One, because we were told to be there, obviously, but that was the mission of the world at the time, And again, the next war is going to be fought totally different. Electronic warfare or whatever it's going to be, it's not going to be the same as World War II. If that happens, we are in a world of hurt, and the whole world is going to have a problem.
One of the things that we hear a lot about, and obviously I'm not in a position to judge the rates of PTSD with soldiers from going back many, many wars. But one of the things that I think compounds the stress is we never really quite knew who friend and foe was over in those countries. And you had to have your guard up 24 hours a day, which is also a stressor.
Anytime you're working with local nationals, in an environment like that, you got to keep your guard up. Like I said, it's a little bit different than World War II. Or World War I, you're in the trenches. You kind of knew the enemy. They were going to come after you. You were going to go ambush or whatever, attack, assault the enemy. There's not as much of that. So you got to watch out, all around you. And I think that created a whole new level of awareness for the current veterans now. And veterans, a lot of times, newer veterans talk about how they enter a room and they do a 360 and they're always monitoring everything around them. I catch myself doing it all the time. Veterans, do it all the time, right? They enter a room, and my girlfriend knows when we enter a restaurant, I need to sit where I can see the door, because you never know what's going to enter that door. And I think it's good to a point, but the other piece to this, when it comes to PTSD, some soldiers, airmen, military members, veterans, they don't handle it well, and that's okay. Everybody handles situations differently. I handle it differently than, friends of mine that killed himself. And it's just a matter of if you caught it quick and you were able to adjust and adapt. Some people are not.
And the timing of going from the battlefield back to friendly, land, wherever that may be, United States or somewhere in between, is so much quicker now. Before, you would have to go on a boat all the way home, have some decompression time, and now literally you are on the battlefield and then at home with no time to process what's happening. Can you speak a little bit to that or how that may impact people?
I think there's two different groups to look at. One is the normal conventional forces. We had a little bit more time to decompress, not as much as we needed. We may have, between your last foot patrol in that land to when you're standing on the ground of the United States, maybe 15 to 30 days, depending on how many flights get pushed back, and you're sitting in Kuwait and you're doing all this stuff. And you're not in a country where it's cool. You're in Kuwait where it sucks. But there's a little bit more of that transition time. The other piece is special operations soldiers, where they're doing missions for 3 to 4 months, and literally 2 days later, they're standing in their house. And I think that's definitely something to look at, right? The transition, obviously, like you said, it's different from previous battles, wars, but you have to figure out how to adjust on the fly. You kind of have to do the whole mental thing, and some people just can't do it, right? They just can't understand how they can be in battle, one day and then 16, 17 days later they're at home. So that transition is hard, and I don't think the government or the VA or anybody fully understands that. And there's not much you can do. There really isn't, because you want to get home and you want to get those soldiers home. Luckily, they kind of started doing things as soon as you touch ground. You have a reintegration period to where you can't drive your car. The commanders say you can't drive your car for 5 days. You may get vacation the first month you're back. So there's things they tried to introduce to the population, the military population, to kind of lessen that time, but it's still a learning curve.
So you're kind of saying, very much like military tactic have changed since the Civil War, rifled, better equipment and everything else, but you're kind of saying in a way that the way we bring our troops home and adjust them back to civilian life, it's probably just as slow to change.
Yes.
And, obviously part of it is an understanding of what's going on. You guys were immersed in situations that, frankly, we've never seen. The door kickers, the suburban kind of combat that you experienced in Iraq, we were on their home field, so that had to have been an adjustment period. And I've heard veterans also talk about adjusting to being around children is even very difficult after their time in Iraq. So, hopefully the government and the armed forces is doing a better job of transitioning to those guys and gals that come back now.
I think veterans need to understand that the whole process, and it's hard for a young soldier to understand this, but you have to take a little bit of responsibility upon yourself. It sucks, right? When you exit the military, when you get back overseas, you have to take the responsibility upon yourself and not look upon the military or the VA to fix it. Because I can tell you right now, if you rely on the government to fix anything, you're going to be waiting a long time, and then you're going to be sitting in your grave, and it's still not fixed. So when it comes to a soldier or a veteran, relying on someone else to help you adjust, you've got to adjust yourself. Now, there's programs out there that nonprofits are trying to help, that work with veterans and do all this stuff, and that's where you need to look, right? So in my opinion, times are slow to change. Reintegration is always going to be a problem because the warfare changes every single time, and then the government has to adjust, and it's almost impossible.
Good point.
So it's like turning a ship it's like turning the Titanic once it already hits the iceberg.
Yeah.
You can't. So you kind of got to look at it as being responsible for yourself and trying to figure out the best way. Now, it's not perfect, but you've got to search for that meaning yourself outside the government.
One of the other points is we seem to gather some of the information we begin to understand is a lot of people come back struggling with PTSD, but it's not always immediate. Mm-hmm. There's a long delay before these stressors actually start kicking in. Did you have any personal experience of how maybe you came back and felt like there were stressors there in your life long after you were back? Do you have any personal experience with that?
I do, and I 100% agree. Unfortunately, PTSD doesn't really go away. Now, I think they've developed this whole there's no cure, but there is a I can't remember the name of the term they've used, but you can improve from it. There's always going to be stressors in your life that cause something to come back. I got divorced in my divorce was final in 2001, and I lost my job that Christmas previous, going through a troubling time with my ex-wife, and I fought to the point where I couldn't take it anymore. I lost my job, and I had nothing at all. My ex-wife was trying to take everything from me, and it was a terrible time for me. I contemplated suicide, and it was in my mind, and it came to the point where I extended for help. I reached out to the Wounded Warrior program and another therapist, and I tried to do it. Unfortunately, with COVID and everything else, everything was very limited on what you can do in person. So I realized at one point when I pulled my handgun out, and I sat there and I said, this is the only way. And I realized real quickly this is not the only way. And I thought of my kids. But PTSD doesn't just go away. And that goes for anybody that's in a traumatic experience. It could be a military member. It could be somebody to an accident. Everybody reacts to a situation differently. And I think you have to figure out a way to refocus yourself and find your purpose. And I always tell people this, especially in the military, if you don't know your purpose, if you can't wake up in the morning every single day and be happy for what you're about to do, it doesn't matter what it is. If you can't wake up and put a smile on your face and know that I'm going to go out and kick some butt today, you're going to have an issue, because it's going to come back, and it's going to come back and bite you.
Well, it's a great point. One of the things that we sometimes maybe skews our perspective here too is most of the time we're talking with more modern veterans that have been out a while. I'd like to think that we're making headway with the VA and support to help the veterans, the newer, more recent combat veterans. Do you know any personally? Do you know if the support mechanisms are improving?
The VA is always improving. They're always trying to put things in to help and support. There's always things that they try and implement to help veterans when it comes to depression or PTSD or TBI or whatever it is. I haven't seen any recent soldiers that that it's helped, but we also are, for the most part, out of these large wars too. So the people are not coming back like they used to in waves. So I think it's just a matter of, for veterans, it's banding together. It's creating these organizations, and just not nonprofits or whatever, but banding together as groups, because there is nobody that understands a veteran better than a veteran. And if you have, and that's, I always want to promote these organizations, the American Legion, these VFW, anything that that's out there for the new generation to be a part of, because the structure is already there, and all we have to do is step in and help support those, and we get together and we help each other, and we're stronger together. And that's huge.
I'm glad you mentioned that. In some previous conversations we've had with some veterans, we've learned there's a decline in kind of membership for VFWs and things of that nature. Do you have any kind of thoughts of why there has been a decline with the newer generation, and how we can get them re-engaged to keep this camaraderie going and maybe some support group going? How do we re-engage them to be involved in something like that, or that specifically?
When it comes to the VFW or American Legion, it's an old structure, right? It's an old platform. And I had this discussion just recently at one of my networking meetings that I went to. We have to change, unfortunately. The American Legion and VFW are not going to fully change, right? They're what they are, and they're great organizations. They do so much for the veterans. But the older generation took this and developed this into something that they lived with and what they did. We have to take it and make it our own. So we have to take the American Legion and change how some of it's done and what it looks like, right? Used to be there's still ones that you can go and smoke in and you can do this stuff. Well, that's not how the world is now, right? So we have to start injecting these young Americans, these veterans into these organizations, but they're going to have to change to be around what we are now. We don't want smoke in the buildings, right? We want it to look like it's the 2000s, right? So I think, taking these organizations and injecting some of these younger Americans in here and these younger veterans and understanding that we're going to have to take over and we're going to have to change it a little bit. But they look at it as this old platform, this old thing, and they don't want to do it. It's clunky. It's weird. I think we just need to change it. And we can do it, but, it just takes a lot of us to do the work.
There's I understand what you're saying about the American Legion and the VFWs. It's we've got a lot of friends at those two organizations, but it's I'm not sure that we see a whole lot of the younger veterans joining those groups. When you look at the membership, it certainly looks like an older group. One of the things that we see here at the museum that I kind of think is a little frustrating is today there are more great organizations out there trying to help veterans, but nothing is networked, and everybody's just kind of trying to do their thing out there. And many of our veterans report that they're not aware of the resources out there to help them. And it seems like there's no good, strong network or book that you can open and say, I need this, call this guy, kind of a thing.
So it's funny you say that. We just started a nonprofit, Combined Veteran Solutions, and the whole idea behind this nonprofit is to combine the networking groups in St. Louis, St. Charles, Jefferson County, and hopefully, and it's not just that, it's help small business owners promote their business. But the idea behind this is we do need to come together as veterans. When a veteran comes to St. Louis, if he moves to St. Louis or he comes back or gets out of the military, we are broken. And I can't fix the nation. I can only fix, my community. And we have to come together and work together to fix the problems. We can't have outside organizations fixing our own problems. It's not going to work. So when veterans come back and veterans talk to me and they say, well, where do I go? One, it's very frustrating is they don't call. Me and many other networking people try and get them to the right location and where they need to be and give them all the assets they possibly need, but they don't want it. Or maybe they think they know exactly where to go. So I think, to your point, there is a movement of that, trying to help that and bring it all together.
How would somebody get a hold of a group like you?
We have a Facebook page now, Combined Veteran Solutions. We have a website, same thing. They can go on the Facebook and message us. We're growing a little bit. We meet at the Wentzville American Legion the first and third Thursday of every month. We are growing. We will be soon meeting with two of the larger networking presidents in the area. We're going to try and mold together to where we can promote each other and kind of get the word out. So that's the easiest way to contact us.
Okay. So one of my last questions is, Chris, you served 20 years. We often hear veterans tell us how it felt that first day to not get up and put the uniform on. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's funny that you actually say that now, because I was talking to my girlfriend the other day. I have 2 products that I bought the day that I left Fort Campbell when I retired. One is, I don't wear it. It's the old retired veteran hat, right? You see all these older retired veterans wearing. I'm not going to wear it. I don't promote I think it's an older generation thing, but then I don't go around promoting my veteran status either, but it's just me. The other thing is the tailgate. When I had a F-250 before I had my vehicle now, and I had this retired plate that goes on the back of my vehicle, and I bought those 2 things. I was the happiest man alive because I thought the world was opened up to me at that point. And I drove off that base, and it was an eye-opener to me. Shortly after that, I realized, oh, crap, what am I going to do? But it was a good moment, because after 20 years of doing anything, you're like, okay, I'm tired. I'm worn out. So for me, I was ready for it. I was ready for the transition. Some people aren't. And for me, it was a good experience.
So I would be remiss if I didn't ask one last question of Chris. And this came up in a previous podcast or a interview we did with him. You were stationed at Fort Knox for a while. Is there gold in there?
There's something in there. And I told you the story. We were golfing, and we decided to hit a golf ball across the fence. Before you can even blink an eye, there was security on us, quicker than I've ever seen in my life. But there's about 7 layers of security between the golf course and Fort Knox. They have more security at that place than all of the rest of Fort Knox. It's crazy. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. I would imagine there's something there.
There's got to be. With that much security, there's got to be something.
I would
it
imagine.
May not be gold, but it might be worth as much as gold.
Exactly.
Well, Chris, we really appreciate you coming to spend time with us today in our podcast. Is there anything else that you want to leave our audience with before we sign off?
I think, for the younger generation that's out there, try and get involved with something. You don't have to spend all your days doing something for the veteran community, but as a veteran, we need to band together. We need to fix our own problems. If you're having an issue, reach out to someone, because there's people that are just, biting at the ankles to help. And people like, you guys that do this is amazing, right? This is truly amazing. And for us veterans that, that are out there struggling, this only helps. It really does. And hopefully this grows. And I would just say that, just sticking together, and come out and do the podcast.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, thank you for sharing your story with us. Thank you for your service and your sacrifice to this country and to your fellow Americans. And we are going to go ahead and sign off from the Dog Tag Podcast at the St. Charles County Veterans Museum. The Dog Tag is brought to you by the St. Charles County Veterans Museum. The museum is a 501c3 nonprofit business. Do you like our podcast? With your support, we'll continue to bring you great programming. If you'd like to donate, go to sccvetsmuseum.org and click on Donate.